to the Middle Cut Podcast. Irish Whiskey in Conversation. Brought to you by Potstilled.com, your one-stop shop for Irish whiskey news and interviews. Now, it's time for your hosts.
Hello and welcome to the Middle Cut Podcast. This is Irish Whiskey in Conversation, brought to you by Potstilled.com, and a very big thank you to our sponsors, irishmalts.com, who will ship you Irish whiskey, gin and poaching all around the world where legal to do so. Check them out on irishmalts.com, a fantastic place to not only get brilliant Irish whiskies, but they do a lot of first releases. They get a lot of brands work with Irish malts to do exclusives as well, which is always fantastic. My name is Matt Healy from Potstilled.com, also known as Potstilled Matt, and I am joined by Matt Healy, Mr. Matt Jones himself from The.Whiskey.Nerd. Welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
Very good. And yourself, Matt?
You know what? I'm doing good. I think we enjoyed the last episode.
Yes.
This is Irish Whiskey in Conversation, the Middle Cut from Potstilled.com, where we talk about all things Irish whiskey. It's the beginning of 2023.
Yeah.
We are seeing the developments of the Irish whiskey industry, I suppose, unfold as we go, and it is our podcast to talk about things that we like to see, like to think about in the world of Irish whiskey. So last week we talked a lot about the
new releases kind of that are coming up on the radar this year. Like it's very interesting to see what's coming out in the market, different kind of trends we see, different kind of influences we see, kind of where whiskey is being taken and where it's going. So it's
and the revolution
of Irish whiskey. We talked a bit about Powers Rye, the new rye release from Powers, but I mean Killowen also bringing out rye whiskies with their collaboration with Belgrove across the world. Like
across the pond, across in Tasmania, Australia. Yeah.
So it's interesting. Like we were kind of talking about how brands are collaborating within Ireland, but also kind of seeing brands collaborating internationally.
Exactly.
Really cool.
If you do want to learn more about that Belgrove release, check out the new release radar on Potstilled Radio, also on Potstilled YouTube. Exactly.
So you have a whole Potstilled empire here. So I think last year
it is a multimedia platform.
Yeah. If we talk a little bit about me, what is Potstilled for people who are coming new?
So if you have arrived to the Middle Cut and Potstilled Radio, welcome. As is, my name is Potstilled Matt, or Matt Healy, as my government name, as people say. So Potstilled, as the line goes, it's a multimedia platform that talks about Irish whiskey. It's designed to, I suppose, uplift Irish whiskey. It is on Potstilled.com is the website, and then I'm on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. I was on WeChat for a while. I wasn't very good at it. I did not understand how to use that app. That was short-lived. For a short while I had a Russian version of Potstilled. That was promptly shut down with the beginning of the war in Ukraine.
Fingers crossed one day things settle down and things can go back. But
for now so basically what Potstilled does is it talks about all Irish whiskies. I'm an industry professional for the Irish whiskey industry, so I'm trying to I kind of meld the world of kind of blogging with industry insight in a easy to understand way. It's kind of try to make it free of jargon. There's a little bit of buzzwords, but not so much jargon, and try to give an insight that I suppose people don't always have, not being in the industry. It's a little bit of everything. Potstilled Radio is the kind of overarching name of the podcast audio format. Under that, previously it would have been interviews with, as I always said, flavor makers and creators. So there would have been distillers and brand owners, and there would have been kind of straight interview styles. A number of exclusive product launches. So I'd work with brands to do live streams to launch their brands, and also on audio format. But now Potstilled Radio has the new release radar. So I'm talking to brands about as it launches. It's kind of a short, snippy, 25-minute format. We know who a lot of these brands are at this point. And if you don't know, I most likely have an interview with them as they're setting up. So it's talking about their new brands, the likes of the Killowen Rye. And then now we have the Middle Cut, which is yourself and myself, talking about the
wider world.
The wider world. Irish whiskey in conversation, exactly. So, been doing about 10 years When I started, I was one of like 3 or 4 people talking about Irish whiskey. I remember once someone told me to set up a Irish whiskey blog, and I distinctly remember, like, I mean, like, word for word, I looked at them and went, who the fuck wants to read about Irish whiskey? And it turns out a lot of people. But yeah, so that was kind of the genesis of that. It was, at the time, there was David Havlin was kind of the lead Irish whiskey blogger in Ireland, in the world. And his blog, even to this day, is still it's still up here. He doesn't write on it anymore, but it's still a great trove of information from the kind of mid 2000s and the early 2010s. And
that is something I've noticed about whiskey. I mean, obviously you've got like your whiskey Bibles written by some people, but you've also got, like, the community is very active. Like, it's very different than wine. Like, so I'm in the Irish Whiskey Society, and we do events.
I was going to say you're in the Irish Wine Club.
Oh no! Well, interesting. We do wine events. So this is kind of how I kind of know a sommelier.
Oh.
And we were doing a tasting where we were pairing whiskies finished in types of sherry.
Yeah.
With the sherries.
Oh, that's cool.
And whiskies finished in wine barrels with the wines from the vineyard. And she was saying that the actual whiskey enthusiasts were much more knowledgeable, much more kind of forthcoming than the wine enthusiasts that she goes to the events, because wine seems to have this idea where, if you don't know about wine, you can't talk about it.
Okay.
Whereas any Tom, Dick and Harry, or Matt and Matt, can set up a podcast, can set up I don't know, it's almost as if, yeah. So it's interesting that the community in around whiskey is a lot more kind of about having fun and enjoying it and sharing the insights. And you find someone whose palate is like yours, you can read their reviews, you can watch their reviews. If you find someone whose palate isn't like yours, you go, I won't like their reviews.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, a lot less, there is a rule. It's not like you go, this whiskey is 95 points, therefore it's good whiskey. It's this whiskey is 95 points for that person.
Yes.
And everyone's palate is different, and it's a lot more, I think, accepting. And that's why, like, people get to do things like this. And if you like what we're doing, you like what we're doing. Kind of.
Yeah, I think it's funny. I talk about on 3 Drams, the Irish Malts has this platform called 3 Drams. You get a sample sent out to you every month, and then I will interview the flavour makers of those. And it's funny for me, I talk about it a lot, that I'm very partial to tropical fruits in whiskies, and I'm really biased, like, and I'm very openly biased. Like, if you have a whiskey that's full of tropical fruits, I'm gonna fucking love it.
Yeah.
And I tell them, and I'm like, oh geez, big bang, like papaya and mangoes here, and a bit of like, oh, this is exactly a bit of, fruit salad, vanilla, your whatever, your bright strawberry, something coming underneath it. I was like, yeah, this is great, and it's just because my palate is it likes that flavor profile. So if I was doing a straight point review, I would likely review that quite highly. But I meet loads of people who hate tropical fruits and they want dark.
They want leather. They want the smoke. Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's one of the things. Like, when I review whiskies, I never give it points. Precisely because what's a 90 point whiskey for me isn't going to be a 90 whiskey for somebody else, because I just focus on what do I taste, what do I, what does it sound like to the person. If they like the sound of the whiskey, they'll get it, because, like, I know definitely my wife, she joins me on some of the reviews as the whiskey noob, and there's whiskies there that she just doesn't like. Some of them, if it has peat in it, can do without.
Yeah. And
I often do find, especially when you go into like certain sites and certain things, not all of them obviously, but like the lower end of the scale never gets used. You never see a whiskey that's at
22 points.
22 points. Yeah. No, obviously that's because a brand isn't going to put out a whiskey that is a 22 point whiskey. They're at least going to get a passing grade before they put it out. But like, it's one of those things that if you, we've 100 points on the scale, it's like, I actually more have just a top 50.
Exactly. Yeah. It's funny as well, because one of the things now the largest award show in the world is the World Whiskey Awards. Run by Paragraph Publishing, very buttoned up affair in terms of, like, it's very well run. They put the word world in front of their awards, and they literally have everything from world whiskies, gin, vodka, shochu, soju, baijiu, grappa. Like, they just made a world of everything, and literally that word world has literally made them, because it's for a general consumer. We talked about this last time. For a general consumer, you see the World Whiskey Awards. Like, not the fucking San Francisco Whiskey Awards. I'm gonna go to the World Whiskey Awards. But I have noticed over the years, and this is my opinion. This is not gospel or fact, but that there's a very large kind of community of judges that get pulled in, and usually a lot of people who supply spirits for the awards will be invited to come judge, and it's blind, so you're not supposed, and you usually won't get put into the category you're in and that kind of thing. But it's very UK centric because the award judging is in the UK, so a lot of UK companies will attend. And I have noticed over the years, even in like Irish Potstilled categories, like peated or like double distilled or more flavor profile akin to Scotch, will win like the biggest awards, because the people judging them usually come from the English or the Scottish whiskey industries,
where they have that palate, and
and that's what they want. And I think it's funny seeing that if you just kind of send your closest akin to like earthy or double distilled or lightly peated or peated whiskies, they over-index really highly, and I think it doesn't always happen. And again, this is just an observation of my own, but I think it's funny, as you said, it's all subjective at that point. It's
so subjective. That can be one of the good things about whiskey, is that it's subjective. Is that as long as you're not like a total Burke about it, you're not like, oh, if you don't like this whiskey, then I don't like you. As long as you're
a total Burke, like a knockburk, or
it's just an expression. So if you're one of those people who says, like, who follows, let's say, that like the Jim Murray Whiskey Bible, and just says this is what I believe, you're not going to have a fun time. But if you're like, oh, you don't like this whiskey, but then maybe you'll like the other one I have on the shelf, or maybe you'll like, and that's one of the joys about it. Like a couple of weeks ago, my wife had a few friends over, specifically for a whiskey and cocktail evening, and I brought out a couple of whiskeys. I made a couple of cocktails with the different whiskeys, kind of highlighting, and I just said, I want you all to like different whiskeys, because they were like, oh yeah, but I don't know, what's the one you like? I'm like, no, what do you like? Find the flavor that you like, because if I sit down and tell you, oh, it's a great whiskey because it's coming in at 50% ABV, it's peated, it's heavily, and you don't like any of that thing, it's not going to be a good whiskey for you. Yeah. So it's all about subjectivity and being willing to tell someone, if you don't like this whiskey, that's good.
Yeah.
It means you're that one whiskey closer to finding a whiskey you will like.
To knowing what you do like, exactly. Yeah. One of the things I do working in the whiskey industry abroad is I try to get tasting notes from people locally, because kind of famously, we talk about in Ireland and in sherried whiskies, we talk about Christmas cake.
Yeah.
One of the things I find hilarious is the Americans don't
know what Christmas cake is.
Christmas cake is, and if you say fruit cake, there's like almost this like it's like an insult to bring fruit cake to Christmas dinner. Like it's this like thing that like no one eats and no one knows about, or no one knows the flavor profile. So it's a funny profile to bring up, because people don't. You go Christmas cake and they're like, I got nothing. Like, what is that?
Whereas we'd be like, sherried fruits, bit of grains, icing sugar,
golden raisins, whatever. Yeah, but you can break that down. Compound flavors aren't like, Absolutely. I when I talk about the tropical fruits, I sometimes say Chewits fruit salad. Yeah. And I googled what Chewits fruit salad ingredients are, and it's pineapple, vanilla, and strawberries. Yeah. And you can break that down. That's fine. But when you go to places like the States or Japan or Kazakhstan or whatever, their palate is subjective to their culture, their demographic, their upbringing, the things they have available. They might not have apple orchards in the middle of Azerbaijan, so they're not pulling out the flavors of apple, but they might pull out other flavors. So I try to speak to people and see what flavors they pull out, and they'll say things that I've never heard of, or in Japan you'd have something that would be kind of like zesty, limey, vanilla, and they might say lychee, and you're like, oh cool. Then I have to go and
find out what a lychee is.
Well, and then what does it taste like?
Or Sichuan pepper. Some whiskies will get to have that kind of like almost tingly, kind of numbing texture to it. And once it's pointed out to you that's what it is, like, oh yeah, that is the note. And it's a note you might not have gotten before. Yep. But it is there.
And again, you might not get that note because you weren't in your sphere of influence doesn't have lychee, or it doesn't. You didn't grow up drinking whatever green teas or
because it's
spiced fish or
like taste and smell are so connected to your memory. So if you've had it growing up, you're going to remember, oh, this is what it tastes like. Oh, I remember maybe that one time I went to the beach and I had a lollipop ice cream, but there was a bit of salt spray in the air, and that's what I'm getting here. I'm getting let's say a whiskey that was aged near the sea, has some tropical fruits in it, and there you go,
aged with an ice cream in it. Wouldn't legally be like all whiskey.
No. And that is like one of the cool things. Like obviously, like barrel clubs and whiskey clubs are a thing that are fun. Like as I said, I'm in the Irish Whiskey Society, and it's one of those things where you have these members who some of them are old and they're a bit more kind of stoic about it, and then you got newer people coming in who are like, oh, what is this whiskey? What's this like? And they're really excited about it. And you get these like people, and you form these relationships with people. Oh, you like this whiskey, or they say, oh, we had this tasting 2 years ago. If you're a new member, like, oh, I think you'd like that one, and you can share knowledge. You can share. It's really good.
How did the response to the sherry evening go? How was the wine side of that?
Very good. We actually had a few interesting wines. We had a Tokai wine, which is
Hungary.
Yes, from Hungary, and it's a very interesting wine. Like speaking about flavor palettes and historical, I had never tasted Tokai wine before. It's what they do is they let the fog in the valleys get onto the grapes, and the grapes start to rot. They call it noble rot. And they call it noble rot to kind of add
That's what you call marketing, my friend.
a bit of marketing to it, and it's really weird because it's
not just any rot.
Yeah, it's noble rot. It concentrates the sugar and it makes this really kind of dense syrupy wine. It actually is really tasty. But I actually had tried the whiskey that we were pairing with before, and I hated the whiskey. I didn't like it. It was one of my least favorite whiskeys. Then I tasted the wine, and it was as if it clicked in my head.
The flavor.
Oh, that kind of not moldy, but that kind of like musty, earthy sweetness. And as soon as I tasted it, I was like, oh, went back to the whiskey. It's like, oh, that's what it is. Because it was like my brain was like, no, there's something wrong here. There's something kind of rotten in this. And once I tasted it, I was like, oh yeah, this is actually great. And there was actually repeated across the board. We did a wine evening, we did a sherry evening, and we've got a fortified wine evening with like ports and things coming up in the next few months, because a good reception to people learning more, just wanting to learn more
out of other categories.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's the thing you would do producing whiskies. You would work to learn about the fortified wines and whatnot, and the spirit that would go into making the cask. So you try to learn a bit more about that. And particularly in the world of sherry, I'm a very big sherry fan, and I took a trip once to Jerez, barrel picking, essentially trying to work with producers to source some good quality sherry barrels. The sherry industry is quite small, and the demand on the barrels is quite high, so you have to do a lot of work to try to source good healthy barrels and what you can do. And in some ways, actually, it's funny, the small producers in Ireland have a better ability to use fresher, older casks in that sense, because they're not ordering 40,000 at a time.
Exactly.
They're ordering 200 at a time, and you can work with smaller producers for things like that.
That then leads into like ideas like single casks, which is very interesting. Like, as you said, smaller producers like a Jameson, a Paris, it's very hard for them to do single cask releases. I mean, they can, of course, do. You'll see some will release single casks, but then you have the smaller brands can differentiate themselves a bit and say, this is a single cask, this is something we found really nice, really interesting, really different, and you can get into there. Yeah.
And also just in terms of business for your value for money, like a person who's making a single cask in Powers could probably at the same amount of time sell 900 casks. The same amount of time and their effort and their skills. So there's a lot to go through there. But it was funny for me in Jerez. We went to the hotel, to the hotel manager, or the porter, and we said, where can we drink some sherry? And the guy was like, why? And he was like, okay. And he like came out of the back, pulled out this like flyer, and it was a tobacco crawl. It was like 14 bars in the town that serve sherry, and you can go to each of them. And at the time, we had a great time. We visited all of them. I learned there's very important. I speak little bits of like a few languages. Spanish is not one of them. I've no hablo español. But I learned can I have 1 and 2? Because it was 2 of us. And then I was like, glass. I was like, sherry, right? Yeah. So every bar I go in, and we're like 11 bars having little glass sherry, little tapas. The person I went with told me they spoke Spanish. They did not speak Spanish, just on a side note. So we went in, and we're in this, probably like the 11th bar. Again, we're having small glasses of sherry, small tapas. It does
add up, though.
It does add up, yeah. But it was, don't worry about it. Right. It was over 2 nights. That's how I'm going to say it. No, but anyway, we're at the tail end of this crawl, and I've been asking for a dos vasos, the oloroso, the whatever. Yeah. Because I have Googled what glass is in Spanish, and it said vaso. And I went, no problem, cool. Again, I don't speak Spanish. So we're there, and I'm in this bar. Now, I've done it 10 times, and all 10 times I've received 2 small glasses of sherry, of the sherry I wanted. Great. And we did basically a different sherry every bar, or whatever it might be. And this guy goes, I said, dos vasos de oloroso, por favor. And he goes, vaso? I went, tea? And he goes, vaso de sherry. And I'm like, tea? And I'm like, at this point I'm like, fuck, dude, you're on the tobacco crawl. Of course I want to drink sherry. What do you... And I'm thinking, like, he was like, you want to drink... Yeah. No, I think he thinks I want to... He's like, what are you drinking sherry for, you know? Yeah. And I'm like, yeah. Certo, yeah. Every Spanish word I know.
Never once has it crossed your mind that something has gone wrong.
No. I just think he's being snobby about sherry, right? And he comes down with 2 fucking pints of Oloroso sherry. And he puts them down in front of me, and he sees my face. And he goes, Señora, vaso? And he takes out a copita and he goes, copa. Copa? Vaso. And then he just walked away. And I was like,
you ordered this.
Yeah, he wasn't taken aback. He knew this was not what I wanted. I have since learned that the word vaso means vase also. Oh. It's like, I just asked for 2 vases of sherry.
And everyone else has just been really nice to you up to
they were like, yeah, fucking gringos. Yeah, don't worry about him. Just give him his glass and be on the way. But yeah, so I learned, I've had a few mistranslations over the years, but that was definitely
one of the biggest.
Well, I don't know if it was one of the biggest, but it was definitely one of the funniest.
Yeah. Oh, it does strike you as interesting. Like when you're talking about in Jerez, like people don't really drink sherry, and like it's interesting. Like when you get to an area where like sherry is dying out, despite it being such a key part of Irish whiskey. Like I was saying to the sommelier at the whiskey side, and she's like, there's whiskeys, there's wines that aren't being made anymore, and there's interesting like a loss of history there. She was talking about there's I can't remember the name of the company, but there's a company that specializes in buying old barrels of sherry, and like, this is what we're going to do. We're going to try and recreate the sherry from back in the day. And it's some guy, he found out his grandfather used to make sherry, and he said, what are we going to do about this? Granddad's shed has like 4 barrels of sherry. They said, well, do you want to sell it? It's like, I don't really want to sell it. I want to get rid of it. I want to kind of keep it on. So he is going around to various sherry producers that are at the end of their life. Maybe it's the family doesn't want to keep it up, or it's just they can't with production costs. And he's trying to like recreate and make a sherry company out of all these tiny little vineyards from around the area to try and recreate the history, because we also will need that in Irish whiskey production, because sherry is a key component. Bourbon and sherry is like the classic formula.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny you say that, it's dying out in Jerez. In 2015, I used to talk to, Americans online, or Italians or Germans who are really enthused about Irish whiskey. And they'd come to Ireland and they'd have 3 bottles of whiskey on the bar. Yeah. You'd have Jameson, Powers and Paddy. And that was it. And in some cases they'd have none. And people would tell me all the time that they were disappointed coming, that you go to a bar and be like, what Irish whiskeys do you have? And they're like, I don't know. Yeah. These 3. And they're saying like, no one drinks it here. They were very and like, again, we talked about last time, we're very excited about Irish whiskey in Ireland. Yeah. But we've, even that's a recent thing, that people have been drinking whiskey in Ireland in the popularity that it is now. People drinking whiskey ginger lime or whatever it might be. I said like 2015, 2016, people weren't doing it. No. We had the whiskey boom that almost got eclipsed by the gin boom, because people suddenly started getting 30, 40, 50 whiskeys on their back bar. Then suddenly started going 50, 40, 30 whiskeys, because there's now 20, 30, 40 gins. Yeah. And that was and like whiskey came and gin came really fast on its heels, and that was kind of the precipice of like €50 gin bottles.
They're still out there.
No, they're still out there. They just don't sell that much.
No.
I don't think Celtic will stock anything over like 45 quid or something these days, and I think that's probably a very fair assessment.
Yeah, it's
there's not going to sell. So
yeah, it's almost kind of a weird. You mentioned Japan, or I used to live in Japan. It's almost a weird kind of reverse of Japan, where no one was looking at their whiskey. No, and they were making good whiskey, but it was pretty much all domestic. And it was I was just there having whiskey, easy as you go. You have this. I remember I visited a friend's house. He brings out like a Hibiki 21-year-old.
Oh yeah.
And we're just pouring away. He's like, it's just cheap. It's fine, and no one drank it. Yeah. And it just gets popular abroad, and then suddenly they're like, oh, we have to shut down production. Mm-hmm. So they were like, oh, because they had to have the consistency of the product that they were putting out. They decided, no, we're gonna stop selling the Yamazaki 12. We're gonna stop selling the Hakushu 12 because we gotta make sure we're putting out.
Make sure we
stuff.
have the stocks.
Yeah, but they didn't have a whiskey boom. There weren't really more. There are a couple of extra distilleries, but they just said it was just the same producers said, okay, we're going to ramp up our supply. You didn't see a huge amount of new Japanese producers. There are a few, but there's not the boom.
Yeah, one of the funny things in Japan, I mean, because there was a demand boom.
Yeah.
Once Japan told the rest of the world they couldn't have it, people went nuts for it. It went from in like obscure and innocuous and non-popular, and literally they basically told the Americans you can't have this anymore, and they were like, the fuck we can. Yeah. And then there is a boom of producers of brands, but not distilleries. And one of the things I find funny about Japan is they have very weird, antiquated production laws. And one of the things is I find this hilarious. Yeah. You don't buy a spirits producer's license. You buy a whiskey producer's license, or a shochu producer's license, or awamori producer's license. Yeah. But they're all like completely separate licenses, which is bizarre. So if you make shochu in a pot still with 100% barley aged in wood, it can't internationally, but you haven't made whiskey, even though if all the because you didn't make a whiskey, you didn't have a whiskey producer's license.
Yeah. It's very British. Oh wait, you got a license for that?
Yeah, exactly. But funny enough, they have to pay the duty up front when they produce the spirit, and if they export it, they get it back as like a tax credit. But like, so it was one of the things that constrained both the shochu industry and the whiskey industry in Japan. Was they were like, okay, well, we want to make 1 million extra LPA this year, but we have to pay $20 per, or 20, whatever, 500 yen per LPA. That means we're now going to have to pay an extra, whatever, 5 million yen, because they have to pay it up front, which constrains, those kind of taxation systems constrain the expansion and the development of a distillery. Because in Ireland, you lay it down in a bonded warehouse, you're not paying tax unless you clear it in Ireland, whereas they do it the opposite way around.
And I think there's actually a lot of, like, even from the government, there was a lot. I think it's called the Sovereign Wealth Fund has a whiskey investment fund where they're supporting a bunch of distilleries and setting up. Like, it is interesting, I think, to see the support out there for distilleries and the pride that some people are taking nowadays in the fact that we've got
in what country are you talking
Ireland.
About? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, we've got
Sovereign Wealth Fund.
I think it's
very Japanese.
It sounded very Japanese. I think I can't remember the name of it, but I remember reading about there's this fund that will loan money to distilleries, saying you've got no interest on this for next 3 years because you can't sell it for 3 years.
Hey, interest-free money.
And so you can set up a distillery, and it's, of course, to be secured against the actual stock they've produced.
Exactly. So
it's fine.
You can't pay it back. It's an asset-backed loan, essentially. Yeah.
But it's just like to let them kind of get off their knees and get onto their feet. Whereas, as you were saying, in Japan, they were like, "Oh no, tax up front, please," and so the producers couldn't produce, and so it's kind of a weirdly reversed here, and that's where we're seeing, I think, the boom here, and we're hopefully gonna take a good place back in Irish whiskey around the world.
Yeah, and I think it's also, we talked last time about self-fulfilling prophecies. The more people talk about the boom of Irish whiskey, the more Irish whiskey booms, if that makes sense. Very interesting. In Japan, I also made a translation mistake. I left out a word in I had, in transition year, I took Japanese for a year. I only went to Japan once. It was not useful. It was a year ill spent. And I remembered very little of it, but in the Irish embassy in Tokyo, there was like 100 journalists and importers and stuff. And I've talked about this on my TikTok before, but I wanted to introduce myself. I want to say, my name is, I am from this company, I make this whiskey, and I am from Ireland. And I stood up, and I was brilliant.
Oh, the confidence.
The confidence, it was spectacular. And the sentence I screwed up on was, I was trying to say, Watashi wa Irlando jin desu. I am from Ireland.
Yeah.
And I stood up and went, Watashi wa Irlando desu, where I just said, I am Ireland, which prompted a raucous laughter from the very polite Japanese people. But of course, I had no understanding of what had just, and I was like, but I am Ireland. So yeah, I've had a few run-ins. I've mistranslated something in Italy.
Yeah. In Spain.
In Spain also. I had my Japanese business cards professionally translated, and then I Google translated my Korean business cards. That was not a good idea. No. Because I then printed business cards that said I was the instead of an export sales manager, I was the sales manager of a takeaway restaurant.
Probably export
to take away. Yeah. So in Italy, I did 2 weeks of nightly whiskey tastings all around the north of Italy, and I learned the phrases again. Same thing. Hello, my name is. I am from. And then to top it off, I would say I don't speak Italian, because again I don't speak Italian, and I'd say this is Dario. Dario is my translator, and I didn't actually know I was messing up, because then Dario would go into this little rattle off. He would say something, and every night he would get laughter within 20-30 seconds. And I was like, this guy Dario's a funny guy. Like, he's always getting laughter. And 2 years later, I was talking to an Italian guy working in one of the distilleries, one of the distillers, and I said, oh, this is the thing I said. And I said, Dario, I trattatore. And he went, oh, Matt, no. And I went, what? And he goes, you just say trattatore? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, no, traditore. Traditore is translator. Trattatore is a traitor. So I was like, so anyway, I'm Matt. I'm from Ireland. Make some whiskey. I don't speak any more Italian. This is Dario. He's a fucking traitor. And enjoy your night. And he would always stand, and I said it to, I only met Dario recently at the Boan thing, and he was there, and I said, dude, was I going around Italy calling you a traitor? And he was like, oh, dude, it was so funny. He was like, that's every night I'd have to explain that you meant translator, not traitor. But it's literally, it was a T. It was like a T, then a D that I'd swapped, and
for him though, he probably like loving it. He's like, "Oh, here's my icebreaker." He doesn't have to come up to break into the crowds like this idiot here, isn't he? And everyone gets to make fun of you, but then drink a bunch of whiskey.
Exactly. Yeah. Sure, why not? But yeah, so that was interesting. But yeah, trying to spread the good word of Irish whiskey around the world.
It is interesting to see like the way brands are approaching different parts of the world. I think Tullamore Dew are releasing products specifically for Eastern Europe. They have a honey whiskey kind of liqueur that they're producing in Eastern Europe.
Yeah, it's honey from Bohemia. It's not even just for the area. It's the honey that they use in it is literally from the Czech mountains.
Yeah, so it is interesting to see like Irish whiskey. It's spreading around the world and it's doing different things. There's loads that like Teeling are doing special releases just for certain countries. You get different brands like actually in the society we have a whole the Irish abroad tasting where people have gone on holidays and they're bringing back bottles that you can't get in Ireland. Irish whiskey that's
sell elsewhere, just not at home.
Yeah, it is good. I think the boom is booming, and as long as there's more people booming about the boom, then it'll keep booming.
Yeah, and single casks are enormous. Like from an export point of view, especially with Irish whiskey, when you're trying to bring into a new market, the idea of special,
that's just for here,
really works, opens a lot of doors. But I was in Munich with Dahi O'Connell of WD O'Connell Whiskey Merchants. I'll show you a little bottle there of the Bill Phil, one of my favourite whiskies at the moment. So I'm in the show, stood beside Dahi. We're repping different brands. Obviously he's repping his own brand. And I was asked, there was this group of Germans, and they said, tell them all about your whiskies. And I said, this whiskey is just for Germany. It's exclusive, 2 barrels, can't get anywhere else. And I've only had this like twice in my career. this happened, and there was this like couple, and they were like, "This is only for Germany." And I was like, "Yeah, no, it's exclusive just for Germany." It was, so it's not very good. And I went, no, it's fantastic, And they went, but if it was good, you would sell it everywhere, no? Why would you only sell it in Germany? If it only for Germany means it's not very good whiskey. You don't sell it everywhere. And I was like, no, it's exclusive. It's
I get where you're coming from.
I see what you're doing, but no. Yeah. And then so that just like took some like backpedaling. I was like, no, it's exclusive. It's for you guys. It's meant to be like distinct. And they were like, okay, this one's for the German palate. And I was like, we'll
go with that.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the idea of single casks and barrel picks and store picks, that's a huge thing. Like in American bourbon, you'll see like, let's say, a bottle of Buffalo Trace and a store pick single barrel of Buffalo Trace beside twice the price. But it's because
absolutely,
and it's like, but it's the exclusivity of you can only get this one here. And what if it's great? It might just be the exact same. It might taste the same.
What if it's great? What if it's terrible? Who knows?
The FOMO.
$60.
Yeah, the FOMO is massive.
Yeah,
and so it is kind of that idea of exclusivity, and that is still something we're seeing, I think, around with Irish whiskies, because as we're growing. I mean, was it Gold Spot and Blue Spot?
Yeah.
I remember Gold Spot was launched in Ireland, and then they were saying like, in about 3 or 4 months there'll be a distribution in America, and the auction sites went wild. They were like, I can't wait 3 months. I need it now. It's exclusive.
I need it this moment.
I need it now. Yeah. Exactly. And in Blue Spot as well, you still see it like auctioning. You can walk into most stores and get it like for what, €80 the retail price here in Ireland, whereas it'll be $200 in America if you see it on a store shelf. It's like, because I bought 3 of these bottles and they're on my shelf, and if you want it, you have to pay this price.
Yeah. I mean, as a person that holds an economics degree, I can assure you that's called supply and demand.
Funny thing that.
But yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. There's especially that demand and collectability of bottles. People ask me all the time, is this bottle going to appreciate? Should I put away 6 of these bottles? And I always try to talk to people, particularly those who are coming into the market fresh as a investment point of view, which is kind of it can be a difficult or a dangerous way to come into a market, to get burned on Bitcoin and things like that, and I try to explain. One thing, if you invest in whiskey is great, because if the market bottoms out,
you still have a nice bottle.
Yeah, you drink.
You can drown your sorrows.
You can't drink Bitcoin.
Yeah.
But I try to tell people that, collectible whiskies need to have this like magic Venn diagram of supply that is outstripped by demand, but limited enough to increase in value, but not so limited that no one knows about it.
Yeah.
So it's like some small producers are like, there's 150 bottles, and you're like, is this going to be the next? Is this going to be the next Gold Spot? And I'm like, I actually don't know if it's. I don't think this one will be, because literally like nobody knows. Like I know someone who's buying the first bottle released from every distillery in the country or whatever. And I'm like, yes, but what's the average cost of those bottles? And they're like, well, it's cask 1 or it's cask 2, average bottle price £450. I'm like, it's probably not going to appreciate that. That's appreciation. That's
already
that's top.
Unless you are willing to wait, let's say 20-30 years.
Yeah.
And then that distillery itself becomes massive. It becomes something huge.
It becomes the next Jameson.
And then someone isn't buying the whiskey, they're buying the history.
Yeah.
Another way you could, I've seen people kind of look at that is like collections, like the Teeling Revival, the Renaissance, the collection. If you can buy the entire collection, it suddenly spikes in value, because if someone came to it later, if they could only get bottles, let's say 3, 4, or 5, bottles of 1 and 2 is then much more valuable. Yeah,
it is. Depending if it because sometimes the chase, like people don't want to buy. All right, what am I really into? I'm into Dark Alex. Right, there's 8 trees in this series. Do I want to buy the whole series at once? No, I'm going to try to pick up. I'm missing tree 7, and it was only released in South Africa, and I really need that bottle or whatever. And those things can cost the whole collection can be less than the sum of the parts, if that makes sense. But I think it's a busy time for Irish whiskey in both bottles and casks and investment sites and everything in between.
My whole thing is always just open the bottle, enjoy it. It's some things obviously you might hold on to. You might
let's see. No, keep talking. I'm just going to see if we're going to have the nice pop from this episode.
Because some bottles
Yes,
I
it's
love
good,
the
isn't it?
sound. The
Isn't it?
sound, and it
Yeah.
just, and then the glug 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 is it.
Just talking about single cask. This is a single cask Sauterne. I fucking love Sauterne casks.
From Clonakilty.
From Clonakilty, yeah. So.
Yeah. It's just like, whiskey's for enjoying. Whiskey is for sharing. Obviously, you might have some that are great, some that you want to hold on to, some that.
I don't.
It never gets old. It never gets old.
We're filming too early to be imbibing upon. Well, I'm gonna be tempted at that point.
But like the whiskies, well, that might go out that might be out of production. Like silent distilleries or distillery brands that go away. I remember I living in Japan and I could get the Jameson 12-year-old, the special releases, special 12-year-old in like the kind of
the ruby red.
The ruby red.
Yeah.
That was my daily whiskey. I was like, oh yeah, this is great, just pouring away.
Don't worry about it.
And now, because it was everywhere, I was like, if I can get this in Japan there's a shop called Don Quixote's.
Yeah.
But the logo was a donkey.
Okay.
So Don Quixote's, yeah. And I was like, if I can get this here, surely it'll be available forever. Can't get it anymore.
No.
And it's one of those whiskeys that was
incredibly valuable whiskey.
Yeah, and I was just pouring it away.
Yeah.
But I'd rather be the kind of person who enjoys the whiskey, drinks it, rather than like hold on to it, as you said, one day, hoping that maybe one day this doubles in value, and then I sell it and I never get to taste it.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think one distillery, not an Irish distillery, I'm going to reach behind myself very inelegantly here. This is a bottle of Talnua single pot still whiskey from the States, American pot still whiskey. Now I'm going to put this here in front of us for a moment. This is somewhere, I think, now not Irish whiskey, but they are championing single pot still, which of course can be made anywhere, just can't call it Irish.
Yeah.
They're using mixed mash bills. They're doing it in Colorado, in Arvada, Colorado, which upon visiting them, I learned that Colorado is a high altitude desert, which I never think of Colorado. I think of the Rockies and
you think of snow and
exactly. They're a really interesting setup, a very interesting team. They came to Ireland. Patrick Miller and his wife Megan came to Ireland and loved Green Spot and Redbreast and everything. Went back to the States, and they're small. I think of Talnua because we talk like Irish whiskey has caught wind of Talnua, and people talk about it a lot. But it is still a small distillery. They only sell within Colorado. And they don't ship abroad. They don't ship to other states.
I've tried to find their bottles. And I'm like, because my wife's American, so I'm like, next time I'm abroad, I'll go look. And we went to Chicago. I was like, can't find any Talnua anywhere. I'm like trying to convince her that, you know what's great to visit this time of year?
Denver.
Colorado would be great. Wouldn't it be great? Maybe we could swing by this great town called Arvada. Like, I hear there's some great things to do there.
Yeah. No, I think this is one that's going to have a lot of future fans, if that makes sense, as they expand outside Colorado and champion pot still. I think these guys are going to do it. Funnily enough, I organized a collaboration between them and Boan Distillery, and that was a really cool project because they're making triple distill pot still, Boan's making triple distill pot still, and what we did is we gave Talnua the Boan mixed mash bill recipe that included malted barley, unmalted oats and rye. Talnua, we made it with all Irish grains. Talnua made it all with Colorado grains. And then what we did is we had it distilled and we held both of the spirits. We worked out over like a 5-year period, if we fill 6 casks, with their evaporative losses, they needed 8 casks. Okay. Boan essentially owns 3 of the Talnua casks. Talnua owns 3 of the Boan casks, and they're maturing this same recipe in the same type of casks. And funnily enough, while they make pot still, they make it very much in like virgin oak, like most of the American distillers. Because the American distillers don't use ex-bourbon barrels. So we were like, we're maturing these in ex-bourbon barrels, and they were like, well, hang on a sec. And we actually delayed the project because they just bought virgin oak like they normally do. And I was like, I don't have a supply of virgin oak. And they were like, well, we don't have a supply of bourbon barrels.
But you're in the place where it comes from.
So we collaborated, it was fine. We got these bourbon barrels. And literally to the second, I stood outside the pump room for the cask filling room, and I stood there with my I'll do it a little bit this way. I stood there with Patrick Miller of Talnua on FaceTime, and I was like staring. I had a peeked at the cask. You can't have phones by the cask when you're filming them, but I was like screaming at the distillery team. I'm like 3, 2, 1, and literally to the second, Talnua started filling their barrels and Boan started filling barrels at the exact same second. We did this cool collaboration. We made a barrel head. We put the Boan logo, the Talnua logo, the Colorado flag on it. Michael Walsh, apparently an artist both in terms of distilling and painting. And then we kind of like, because it's laid down for a number of years, you kind of forget about it. And over Christmas, and this is probably 2 years later now, over Christmas, Michael Walsh, who was again the head distiller of Boan, his dad was in the States. He was in like Chicago, right? Yeah. And then apparently just like went on this trip without telling him, I guess. And he calls up Michael. This is a great story. He calls up Michael and he goes, Michael, I'm at this distillery and there's no one here and they're not letting me in and I want to do a tour. And he was like, okay, like
what do you want me to do?
Yeah, what do you want me to do about it? And Michael's at home in Dingle at this point, like he's not with him. And he was like, where are you? And he's like, we're in this place called Colorado, right? And he was like, okay, weren't you in Chicago? He's like, yeah, but we're in Colorado now. And he was like, okay. He was, and I'm at this Talnua distillery, and Michael was like, "Are you?" He was like, "Okay."
How did
he was
that
like,
happen?
he was like, but it's not even that. He was like, "I don't," because he was like, "I don't know every distiller in the world. Like, I can't just like ring up, whatever distillery you're at and make them let you in." And he goes, "Talnua." And he goes, "Actually, I do know those guys." And he anyway, the dad got into the bar, and Michael was like, "Tell them you're my dad." And funnily enough, I think whoever was there, they weren't open. I'm not really sure there's meant to be anyone there, but there was like someone like coming in to like have a drink or something. It's like the bar just opened. It was like open at 4. It's 4:01. And the bartender's like, mate, I have no idea who fucking Michael Walsh is.
Never mind who Michael Walsh is. I don't know who you are.
Yeah, but the patron that came in was like, oh, the distiller from Ireland that did the thing, and the dad was like, yeah, and he was like, oh, cool, that was a really cool project, and like the guy at not the bartender, the guy at the bar was like, dude, that was a really cool project, yeah, and he told the dad all about it, and dad was like, they all knew you in there, it was great. It's like that must have been a great moment for Michael. But around the world, but it's a cool collaboration. I think it's a distillery that's going to do cool things. You have to get to Colorado now.
I do. I just have to get to Colorado. I mean, I have to just convince Rose. I mean, if she's watching this, she might know the ulterior motive behind, let's go plan a trip to Colorado. But yeah, I really want to get out there and just see what they're doing and see, because it will be different. Because like with never mind the like using virgin oak in it, never mind the difference in like the grains, like where it's grown, but also the climate, the influence that has on a whiskey is interesting.
It's hot.
It's hot, yeah.
And winter cold. But I mean, they're extremes. You laugh, but like, we don't have either of those extremes. We don't get hot and we don't get cold. So
isn't the thing like some of the Scottish whiskies out on like the Hebrides and the islands, it's just like, oh, this whiskey can be aged for 30 years and it just barely gets a bit of oak influence because it's so cold. It's just so consistently cold. Whereas
exactly, it's an interesting one. It's. I think that warehouse they before they've had a few upgrades in Talnua with their stills and their processes and all this kind of stuff as they've got more popular. And it's funny, they just put in 3 new stills, and they had usually the barrels maturing by the stills, and I think they've now had to invest in like external warehousing and whatnot. But the room is like fragrant with alcohol because it's
just making me jealous right now.
Oh, it's good, but it's funny to talk about that because they found this cross circle of American whiskey enthusiasts and Irish whiskey enthusiasts in America who are all fans, and they have this I think it's called All Saints release, and it's a release every St. Patrick's Day, and you have to be at the distillery to get it, and it sells out like every year. But what's funny is I was talking to Patrick, he's Distiller Miller online if you want to look him up. He was saying that they just put in 3 new stills, and I was like, how is it? And he was like, we're at max capacity. He was like, we need more stills or bigger stills. This was too small of an expansion. And very much they're championing this Irish style in the States, and fans of Irish whiskey are flocking to it because they want to see what hot American single pasta whiskey does and what it's like.
Yeah, it's interesting to see like the bourbon and rye obviously is dominant there, but then you got like American single malts are coming out. Like Jack Daniels had a single malt. It's like
Yeah, that's how you know things are getting popular when the big guys.
When the big guys are like,
pivoted.
okay, we have to follow suit or get left behind. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think it'll be good to see what Tanya will do, and then of course to taste it.
Exactly, and of course with the inclusion and the growing interest in rye in Ireland, we'll see some of that flip side. Those American, expressions of grain and whiskey coming into seeping into the Irish psyche, and I think we'll see a lot more.
Yeah,
our brands release their own spirit, or at least inclusions in blends and whatnot this year.
And making like an Irish bourbon that isn't a bourbon, but
an Irish maize whiskey,
whiskey maybe like,
as that is a protected term.
Bourbon or something where they just change the name slightly with it, put a fada on it and pretend.
Make it an A fada.
Yeah, and then.
No, but I think it'll be very interesting. But of course, guys, I want to say a very big thank you to you guys for listening in. This has been The Middle Cut with Potstilled.com, Irish Whiskey in Conversation. A very big thank you to our sponsors, irishmalts.com, who will get you the finest Irish whiskies, gins, putchings delivered straight to your door. Check them out on irishmalt.com. Matt from The Whiskey.Nerd.
And Matt from Potstilled.
Exactly. Give a good plug for your YouTube before we go.
Oh yes, if you haven't seen it, I have a little YouTube channel where I review
2,000 people following. Not a big deal.
Yeah, I review Irish whiskey. I review whiskies, focusing on Irish whiskies, and I make cocktails, kind of highlighting the various ways you can use whiskey, the versatile way you can use it to just kind of enjoy what is probably the world's best spirit.
There you go. You heard it here first. Very big thank you to you all, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for tuning in to The Middle Cut.
Sláinte.